So hello everybody, welcome to the Agile Project webinar where we're going to go through how to set up an Agile project from scratch. Just wanted to just a couple of technical checks. If you're on the call, just make a message in the chat box if you can hear me properly and if you can see my screen. Just say yes, that will be fine, just so I know everything is broadcasting okay. Good, great. Okay, thank you for letting me know. That's great news. So we'll just get a couple of minutes for a few more attendees to join, and then we will kick off. In the meantime, whoever's on the call, and welcome to today. It's really good to have you, and thank you for taking your time on Saturday to attend this webinar. I promise to make it very interesting and very relevant. Just so I can tailor some of the communications, some of the points that we'll discuss today, could you just put in the chat box whereabouts you are in the world right now and what your role is that you're currently doing in your organization or with your clients right now. Thank you. And we will just wait a couple of minutes for a few more people to join. See a few more people still coming in. So again, if you've just joined, and if you haven't done it already, please do put in the chat box whereabouts you are in the world right now, because we've got a fairly broad international audience, and also what role you're playing currently in your job, whether you're a business analyst, a project manager, a tester, or a company owner. So please let us know, so that when we're going through, then I'd like to make this as interactive as possible with you, so I can touch on some of the points that you may be experiencing in your job today. So we've got a few people there. Somebody's just asking, hi, where can I chat? So you should see that on the webinar on your app. If you're on your phone, you should have a section in there where you can go to chat. You maybe have to swipe across from one side to the other. And if you're on a computer, you can just hit the chat box. It'll just be there, questions and answers, or a chat box. We've got a few people saying, so we've got somebody from Sydney in Australia, welcome. We've got some from India, we've got Scrum Master from India, welcome here. We've got Samuel we've got a university lecturer from Nigeria, welcome, that's really interesting. We've got a business analyst from Hyderabad, we've got a Scrum Master in Ontario, Canada, project manager in the UK. We have a project manager based out of Bengaluru. We've got a DevOps lead. Okay, so we've got a really good mix in the audience. It'll be very interesting, I think. What I would like to encourage you is feel free to just put your questions in as we're going through. If I can't answer them straight away, then I will save them up for later. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. But just don't feel free. If there's anything that's that you need to repeat, or if there's anything that you have some burning questions on, please just put them there in the chat box and we will try to address them. So we will start now. Thank you very much for joining today. It's really great to have you, and I'm really excited to present this concept of how to set up an Agile project from scratch. So let's get moving. So why we're here, we have, as I said, we have a mixed audience of people. We have business analysts, we have Scrum Masters, we have project managers. So why we're here is, and what we're going to address today, is people who are already managing a project and they may want to improve. You may want to get into Agile and understand how Agile works and what's it all about and what is the hype, because there's lots of hype about Agile. You may like the idea of implementing Agile principles in your current job, or maybe even in your personal life, because I was speaking to somebody the other day and they actually do homeschooling using Agile Kanban boards. So you can apply these principles to help people be more productive and more communicative. You might be a startup or a maturing organization. You may want to bring in Agile to speed up your development of your products and your projects. But most importantly, you understand the true power of collaboration and communication. And that's really what it's about. What we'll do is we'll get into a little bit about the pitfalls of waterfall projects, and we'll use that as a sort of as a frame of reference, if you like, for those who mostly, a lot of us probably in the audience may already doing waterfall projects. We may have challenges. We'll touch on those and explain how Agile looks to solve those. And it's really, really based on collaboration and communication, because that's what makes projects really successful, because after all, it's a people business. Of course, we're implementing technology, of course, naturally, but we are ultimately responsible to make people work together to make them productive to produce the end result. So we'll get into that in the webinar. So what we'll do in this session, we are going to learn the aspects of Agile Scrum. I'm going to talk about Scrum at the latter part of the webinar. We'll cover things like communication and collaboration earlier on in the webinar, because they are foundational points to make us successful for whatever methods that we look to adopt. So we'll look at the challenges in implementing Agile within organizations and the typical problems that people experience, how to be successful then in overcoming those problems and implementing it. And that's based on a methodology that I put together and executed in a multinational bank some time back, which allowed me to create a very effective, high-performing team, and most importantly, really good engagement with people, the customers, and the people sort of on the edges, on the fringes, who can be the people that actually can cause a lot of the problems for us when we're trying to change. People don't like change. We'll talk about that as well. And then lastly, we'll just go into some of the tools that we use to run an Agile project to make it work well. I'm going to keep this fairly simple in terms of Agile concepts and Agile demonstrations and tools for people who are more new to the audience, but feel free to ask more in-depth questions and challenges that you're having, so then I can address those and that would satisfy everybody. So let's get into the first topic, which is the pitfalls of waterfall projects. And having done this for a number of years, I've experienced the regular problem with interpretation and lack of information that causes people to go off in their own, what we call as silos or insular groups. They say birds of a feather flock together. So testers like to be with testers, developers like to be with developers, analysts or business analysts like to be with business analysts. They have a common language. They have a common style of documenting or implementing what they're doing. And they're comfortable with each other. And therefore, what happens as a result is, if we make a simple question, say, make me a simple home to live in, everybody will have a different map of the world, and it doesn't match other people's maps of the world. So an analyst, if we say make me a simple home to live in, an analyst will have a view of that and will put together a caravan or a motorhome. The coder might have a cottage by the sea. The tester might have a castle or fortress. And each of them has a different view. Each of them interprets that statement, that question differently. And this is the continual issue of projects. Now, it can even be a problem in Agile, and it can be a problem in waterfall. It comes down to the communication. But the very sequential nature of waterfall projects, we do a big phase of analysis, we do a big phase of design, we do a big phase of build, test, and implement. That causes this problem to become more pronounced, and therefore we see a lot of the problems that I'm sure a lot of us here, a lot of you all sitting here thinking, yes, I have these sorts of problems on a day-to-day basis. So what are those regular challenges in waterfall? So firstly, we're dealing in very big chunks of work. It's it's a lot to carry, it's very heavy, it's a lot of detail to think about, and therefore it also has a lot of complex detail associated with it. And we are asking people sitting in the business, people sitting in different teams and technical teams to understand all of this knowledge up front. A lot of knowledge, a lot of documentation, a lot of requirements, a lot of test cases, whichever phase you work in a project, with complex detail associated with it, and long phases. And you think, when is this phase going to be over? We can move to the next one. So there's a lot of issues there. And as a result, we often get adverse outcomes in the industry. I don't know if you've heard this expression, but we talk about that's a real car crash, or this project is a train wreck or a train crash waiting to happen. It's a real big struggle, and therefore projects are very delayed when we run them in the traditional ways, and we struggle with them. So just to go through the sort of the conversation, some of the narrative and conversation that we experience, and like I've seen is this is how it comes out. So we say we'll specify the whole solution up front. This is typically what we have to do. This is the nature of a waterfall approach. We need to spec everything. We need to think about everything. We need to document it all. And as a result, that's lots to think about in one go. We'll make mistakes, and not only making mistakes, but we'll also ask for things that we don't even need, but we didn't realize we didn't need them until later. And as an example, if you just to touch on a very sort of everyday type example, if you are told, so a lot of us in lockdown around the world, a very unfortunate situation, if we were told today that we are going to extend the lockdown across the world for 3 months, it's coming to you tomorrow, and so what you need to do is you need to stay at home. You cannot go to any shops, so you need to go to your food shops and your toiletries and buy all of your things that you need for the next 3 months to stock up. And assuming that there's enough supply to fulfill everybody and nobody starts panic buying, then what will happen is we will all make a big list of stuff that we need for the next 3 months. You know, we need rice, we need lentils, we need dal, we need flour to make bread or to make chapatis. We need all this stuff, and we make a big list. We need this many nappies for the children. We need whatever it is, and we make a big list. We go out and shop, and we come back with a whole load of stuff. What will happen in that is we will probably buy more than we need for that 3 months for a few reasons. One of them being that we think that maybe it could extend for more than 3 months, so I should buy more. Secondly is we don't really estimate, and we will overcompensate just in case we need some extra stuff or something happens in between that. And as a result, what will happen is we will overaccumulate, we'll think too much about all of that, we'll take too much, we'll bring too much and store it at home. We might also have to go to IKEA to buy more cupboards and storage to put them in, but we will generally buy too much. And at the end of that 3 months, we'll probably find there's quite a lot of waste and quite a lot left over. Same kind of principle happens when we're dealing in software, where we're having to do everything up front. We think about a lot, we think about more than perhaps we need. So those kind of issues can come, and I've seen that where we realize that partway through the project, we didn't need all this stuff. Actually, you know, when it comes to the crunch and we're under pressure with time, we realize that actually we didn't need so much of that after all. Maybe those requirements are not so much of a must-have, but they were at the beginning. So times change, priorities and needs change. We'll go through that during the course of this webinar as well. The next issue is we need comprehensive documents to be signed off. And it's the same principle there. We've got to think and read all this documentation up front, and we've got to visualize everything. And the number of times I've experienced with clients and business people where they have to read 40, 50, 100 pages of all these huge requirements, and they struggle to visualize that, to be able to turn that into a concept in their heads that they can literally wrap their heads around that much information. It's very, very difficult. Then we hit some snags as we're delivering, and we need to replan, and usually or sometimes replan as well as things happen. As a result, we miss the deadline multiple times, and we get delays and spiraling costs. So although we're saying we'll fix an end date and we'll have everything done by this date, the more complex the project is, the more likely that date is going to shift out. Everyone needs to work in their respective teams. We have the analysts, the developers, the designers, the testers, the architects, and everyone's in their teams. As I said, birds of a feather flock together. They talk their own language, they do their own thing. It becomes very siloed, and I've seen so many times where you need to repeat and rehash the same knowledge as you're passing it through the chain of delivery from analysts to developers to testers, and we have all of these documents and all these designs. We have to take a translation of a particular design at a point in time to provide that message to a tester so they can understand it in themselves. So there's so much extra work that has to be done to keep refreshing and representing the knowledge. And then finally, at the end of the project, we all do lessons learned at the end of the project, because that's what we should do. We should improve, continuously improve, and make ourselves, for the next time when we do our next project, then we've learned all the lessons, both good things that happened and the bad things. More often than not, this is what's happened. It's been a tough ride. I don't have the time to go back and retrospect, and sometimes it was so difficult. I don't know if I can emotionally handle the going back and going and kind of dredging up all of those difficulties. And we had arguments with the sponsor, and we had arguments with the change team, and the vendor wasn't wasn't performing very well and the vendor doesn't really want to talk about it. Sometimes it's a bit like a therapy session. It's easier to just suppress it and bury it and move on to the next thing. And a lot of the time, there's also internal pressures in the organization, or perhaps the whole project team has been dissolved and moved on to different projects. So you don't actually get to regroup unless you have a really strong leader that says, no, we are going to do that even after 12, 18 months. So those are some of the issues there. And as a result of this, the typical side effects are this: we have unhappy team members, we have frustrated sponsors and stakeholders, we have what we call as change fatigue, where you're kind of going through and we have such long phases and so much difficulties and tribulations and trials that everybody becomes a bit bogged down with the amount of change that we're doing, and now we need to do this document or produce a test plan or revisit the test plan, or we need to change our UAT test cases and expand on them because something's changed. So what generally the problem is that you set out to do a particular task, and this is how people like to work: do a particular task and then move on to the next thing, rather than keep revisiting that task because they've got to change it, they've got to amend it because some other delay has come in the project and they need to refresh stuff. So if you've experienced that before with your teams where everyone becomes just a bit tired, that is a big problem. As a result, you then have a communication breakdown. This is a natural follow through. You get tensions. Sometimes I work with people and you have a technical person on the client side dealing with a technical person on the vendor side. There's tensions in the project. There's language differences and cultural differences. Nobody's trying to understand each other. And the easiest thing to do is just to say, I can't be bothered to talk to that person. And nothing gets done. Things get lost. And now when that communication breakdown happens, that then comes through in the quality of what's being built in the software. And then as a result, people are leaving you, right? Because they're not satisfied in what they're doing, they don't feel fulfilled. So these are the sorts of typical challenges and side effects. Just to take a quick pause and just get a sense from everybody here listening, put a comment in the chat if you agree with this. Type agree if you've seen these sorts of things, and let me know whether this is something that you're experiencing or have experienced. Just say agree. Somebody's asking a question: is it me or is the video frozen? The video shouldn't be frozen. Perhaps you can just put a comment in, somebody, just to say whether you're hearing this or not and whether you're seeing the slides change. Okay, we've got an agree. We've got some people saying agree. Good. Okay. Yeah, seen it. seen it. Yes, agree. Agree. Lots of people agreeing. It's a very common problem, and it's very difficult. And it's as a project manager, if you're a project manager or as a person on a project, it's disappointing, and it kind of creates dysfunctional behavior. And that's why people start looking around for jobs and trying to get more value, or trying to do something that's more fulfilling. So there's those are the problems. And if we then switch, then that's enough of moaning about waterfall. Let's just switch over a bit to Agile and just talk about the dynamics, or the types of emphasis and priority on the way that we do Agile delivery versus the regular traditional waterfall, and where the emphasis changes. So where we're talking about following a plan, here, following a plan versus responding to change. So those are two very opposite things. As we all know, as the project continues, as the project evolves and is developed, it unfolds. There does need to be change, and we need to acknowledge that rather than just rigidly sticking to a plan. That is the benefit of Agile. And what's going to happen is some of you maybe start thinking, well, hold on a minute. If you're going to start responding to change, then you can't plan. You can't predict if you're going to change things. You can't predict when you're going to go live and when the software is going to be finished. All these issues and concerns. This is true, but that's addressed, and we'll discuss that later. Contract negotiation, documents that are very highly contractual. Somebody writes a business requirements document, they have to have the business to review it, to sign it off. It's signed off in blood. When it's signed off in blood, then that means, right, we're holding you to that, and if any change comes in later, we said, well, you signed this document off. So it becomes very contractual, and those kind of stifle people's interactions. Whereas the Agile, we're talking about customer collaboration, where we are more of a team with the customer rather than creating these contracts. Now, that's difficult with vendors because vendors have a commercial interest, a supplier will have a commercial interest, so there has to be some care taken there. Again, third point is comprehensive documentation. We said it already. Documentation is very heavyweight, a lot of detail. And what Agile is looking at is working software as more important than documentation. So that means that that rather than obsessing on how perfect documentation is and getting it all right and sealing all of the details and dotting the I's and crossing the T's, the priority is the emphasis on making software that works. And as a result of that, then rather than putting lots of processes and tools like project management processes and sign-off processes and accountabilities and responsibilities, and putting lots of project management tools in place and tracking tools and reporting tools, it's more favoring individuals and interactions, because it's people that get the job done. It's people that and their interactions that actually make it successful, more so than the actual process and tools. After all, it is a people journey that we're on, and we're dealing with people. So then the last one is the second to last is lessons are often not learnt. And in Agile, it's more about continuous improvement. So built into the Agile processes is constant reflection, constant what they call as retrospecting, where you look back after a short period of time and say, how did we do? How can we improve? So you're continually refining and improving yourselves. And the last one is that a point is change manage scope, where if something changes on a project, we've got to raise a change request, and somebody's got to impact assess the change, and then somebody has to price that up and estimate how long it's going to take, and then we have to replan. Whereas with Agile, it's welcoming changing requirements. Now, again, it signifies alarm bells to people thinking, well, if you're changing all the time, it's completely undisciplined. And a lot of people say that Agile is just, you don't need documentation in Agile, you don't need plans in Agile. It's actually not the case, but there is a discipline, and there is the process of Agile, the activity and mindset of Agile allows you to welcome changing requirements without making a big risk to your software implementation. So those are the things there. And again, because with waterfall there's a lot to think up front, it becomes difficult. With waterfall, and Agile looks to try to turn that on its head and improve the way we deliver. So, but there are challenges with implementing Agile. It's not that it's completely straightforward. Otherwise, everybody had been doing it years ago. So it has its challenges, and there's a few points here. If you imagine today, and if you're not already doing it, if you wanted to go to your organization, say, I think we should run our projects in an Agile way, using Agile processes and methodology and a mindset. Your immediate would be like, why? It's all working fine. There's a resistance to change. What you're doing as a result of setting up an Agile project and showing the organization how to do things differently is you're kind of almost declaring a war on waterfall. And you've got to be very, very, very diplomatic in the way that you go about doing this. And this is what this program is about: is how do we create that diplomacy, that creating strong relationships, creating the natural influence, rather than just turning around and starting to Bible bash with Agile and saying we've got to go Agile, everyone should do Agile, this is how it works. Because I've seen that, and it just turns people off. So there's a lot of sensitivities, a lot of communication, a lot of emotional intelligence is required. It's not just a process that we can switch on, because again, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with resistance. So with what we have is vision. So the organization may not have a vision of what agility does and how it works. So what you can do is start small and work within your sphere of influence, and for example, offer up a prototype. That would be one approach. There's multiple approaches you could take. So you're not appearing as dictatorial, but you're showing by without creating any ripples that this could work and this is how it is. If it's communicated well, you'll start to get people buying into it. Business alignment, then you've got to take the business on the journey and talk their language and over communicate with them. So the business may not know, they don't know this is foreign to the business. You're introducing new concepts. The principles are similar, because at the end of the day the outcome is the same, but the concepts are very different. So you've got to get the business aligned with the language, with the idea of it, with how it benefits it. And then the third point is internal resistance. This is more difficult because what you're dealing with is politics. You're dealing with people who are playing power games, who have their empires where they may feel threatened if you start to come to them and say, I've got an alternative way of delivering, and somebody who's sitting in a PMO function or some senior project manager who's happily delivering projects and has a very good reputation, even though they may not necessarily be going very well, but they will be internally resistant because they will see you as a threat. So there's an element of influencing, and there's an element of creating those right relationships as well. For example, you may want to speak to somebody more superior than that project manager or that particular person who may have that resistance, and try to get them to buy into it, so you can kind of cascade down the idea. So there's a lot of organizational change and change management involved. It's not just switch on a process and run with it tomorrow. But so what is the mindset that should be adopted for you as somebody who's working in Agile, as somebody who is if you like an advocate of this process? How should you present yourself? And here, what we're saying here is that the mentality is servant leadership, and this is turning leadership completely on its head. The traditional way of leadership is the leaders at the top, under that comes the management, under that comes the employees, and under that comes the customer. So it's all leading from the top, the leaders. This turns it completely upside down, and actually the leader is primarily responsible for the employees and for their teams internally. And so therefore the team is first. So there has to be, one's ego has to be put to one side. And we're not saying that one's ego or one's desires shouldn't be fulfilled. In other words, if you have aspirations to grow in your career, it doesn't mean you're putting those to one side. It just means that your own ego, you need to think that people are important, because if people deliver, I will look good as well. It's one and the same thing. If you haven't read 1 Minute Manager, then you can see that, and that's a very good example of that, where they talk about how you're empowering the people that are working with you or for you, and they're satisfied by that, and by that you're automatically rated, you automatically have a good reputation. You're facilitating the process, so there's an element of selflessness there. You're serving the team, you're helping them unblock their problems, and therefore you're empowering them. Then when they become successful as a result of doing that, that's your success, and you all grow together, and therefore you're making other people happy, you're making the customer happy, and it's good karma, right? So that's a success. But it really sounds obvious that this is how we should do things, this is how we should help people, but how many people truly do it? It's not so easy, because there's a certain if you like a depth of character, there's a certain mindset that's required, there's a certain for example, letting go of our own insecurities that might be driving us to particular behavior that makes us want to accumulate, makes us want to climb up the chain of command and become very senior very quickly, politicizing and things like that. So servant leadership, generally people who are servant leaders are much more prominently recognized in their profession and well respected, because they have the good qualities that people are looking for, and everyone's looking for a decent, to follow a decent person. So that's a bit more philosophical, but these are some of the underlying principles of Agile. And organizations, in terms of Agile itself, they don't know how to do this well because they lack people that know how to do this well. And this is where you come into it, that if you can adopt this mindset, if you can adopt this understanding and bring about a change using your own character and your own influence, as well as the understanding of agility, then you can make a real big influence and impact, and you'll be really sought after. And what is this all worth? Because if you look at some of the industry statistics and surveys, and these are America, for example, average salary of an Agile project manager is $90,000, so it's pretty high. I think last time I was looking in India, I think it was 14 lakhs or something for an Agile project manager or a product owner. So it's good money because it's a good skill to have, and it's not easy skill to acquire. A lot of software developers use Agile. The project failure rates are much less. Many companies are adopting Agile across the world. Generally, Agile projects are more successful. They're saying 1.5 times higher than those of waterfall projects. And it's helped 98% of companies. Even the US government has saved money if they use, with failed IT projects, they're losing money because, and the same thing happens with the UK as well. That recently there was an app for track and trace, and that was a failure. So a lot of money is just poured in and invested and wasted. They're saying that 60% of companies experience growth in profits after adopting an Agile approach. and many Fortune 500 companies have adopted. So there's a lot of demand out there. There's a lot of there's definitely skill shortage in doing it well, and there's definite benefit, you know, from a personal remuneration point of view in doing this. So it's pretty good, and it's pretty lucrative. Just a short couple of minutes about myself, because obviously you know, I think it's important just to explain what I've been doing over the last 20 odd years. So for me, I've worked across high performance business and tech delivery teams for 20 years plus. Companies like Royal Bank of Scotland, Standard Chartered, HSBC, so we're multinational banks on large change projects. My background is a coding background, so right from the beginning, I had a computer when I was 7 years old. I was really interested in learning how to program. But when I went into industry after doing a computer science degree, then I was very more interested in the business analysis side of things. In other words, straddling or working across both business people and technical people, and understanding the end-to-end and how work gets done effectively, how to support those teams, and how language is used and communication problems occur. I found that really fascinating. And my first major implementation in my first company, which I sort of pride myself on, was we worked for a subsidiary of Aviva, which is a large insurance company, and they had an auction website which was selling off all the cars that had a claim put on them. So if somebody's car was crashed, or it was even stolen and recovered and it was an insurance claim, in the UK, what they would do is we would have dealers, so scrap yards and salvage dealers would pick those cars up and take them to their yards, and then they would store them, and they would take pictures of those and detailed descriptions and send them to us in our organization, and we would put them on a website, and we would auction them off using an auction method. It's a bit like eBay, but for salvage cars. And we had to design the whole system from scratch. We built the auction engine from scratch. We built the front office and the back office processes and interactions and screens. And we didn't really have a strong discipline of project management or business analysis or anything of the sort. But we were such a tight, cohesive team that we implemented this for a company of 70 people. And there was a real feeling of euphoria when the day after we went live and we watched everybody using this new tool. And it was really surreal. And it was really satisfying. And the reason, and we got, you know, a few criticisms for testing and stuff like that, because we didn't have disciplined processes in place. But we were young, and it was a bit like a startup type organization, so it was quite very dynamic. But it was so rewarding working together really tightly, and delivering that. It was, I would say, it's the most rewarding experience I've had. And when I realized that, and had that experience, I realized that actually people is what it's about. Interaction is what it's about, and that's why Agile became very interesting to me, because it's not bureaucratic, it's not putting process, it's enabling people to work, and it's turning around things more quickly than the traditional ways. So therefore, I was worked in communication and cultural specialism, where I was working across India teams, UK teams, even Sweden, Singapore, all different countries, and looking at different cultural dynamics of how people work together and where things fail, and where things don't work, and where communication breakdown happens. And that's why I started all of this work. So that's my story. So what is the real success formula that underpins this Agile concept? And it comes down to me, not just, and aside from the technical skills of understanding Agile and how to run it as a process, because I'm sure a lot of you on the call involved in Agile will know those mechanics, and I've seen that there's some Scrum Masters on the call as well. So you'll had all that training, and you know the detail of what is a Scrum Master, what is a sprint, what is this backlog, a product backlog and a sprint backlog. We will go into those later on in the session, because that's important to cover. But foundationally, for me, it's 4 things to make it successful in this setting up an Agile project. Because what you are doing, bearing in mind, you are responsible for carrying your organization through this change, for helping them change their way of working and thinking. And this is where everything can go wrong if it's not done properly. You're holding the fort. Now, what I'm doing in this session is I'm putting all of you who are here, because you've come here for how to set an Agile project up from scratch, I'm going to put you all in the category of a Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master's responsibility is to be able to not only implement the process of Scrum or Agile in whichever way you do it in your organization, but is to communicate with all the people that are going to be involved with you, either directly or indirectly, to get everyone to buy into it. Because if you don't have people with you on the journey, then it will not work. Even if you've got the most robust process and the best PowerPoint slides about what is Agile and how does it work and what is a sprint and what is a backlog, it will be of no value if these foundational points are not here. Communication, empathy. You're dealing with people and you're dealing with changing the way people are doing things. So being empathic is very important, because you've got to take them on the journey, deal with their issues and their concerns, their doubts, their skepticism, and then help them over the line. Collaboration and working very closely, and cultural intelligence, particularly if you're global. So let's just quickly talk into those points. So communication. What works and what's important is getting consensus built rather than being dictatorial. So you've got to bring them on the journey. Also, empathic listening. I talked about empathy, understanding what people's problems are, what their doubts, make it relatable. And this is where people fail sometimes, especially when talking about agile processes. I've seen it myself. Somebody reads an agile book, they swallow the book, almost like metaphorically speaking, and they all of a sudden start talking about agile as though it's their first language, their mother tongue, and they assume that everybody understands what they're talking about around them. But you have to be cognizant. You've got to be thinking about what kind of communication people need to receive and translating it for them. So not using tech jargon and not using buzzwords. Even, for example, if somebody doesn't even like the idea of agile, you can totally disguise the idea. Never use any of the words, never mention agile, never mention sprints, anything like that. You can redefine what it means using different language and get persons to buy into it, because their own prejudice may kick in that they don't like agile. So there's different ways and means of doing things. You've got to talk about outcomes versus process to get people convinced, and take them on a visual journey so that they can understand as you're going through how it's working, and they can relate to the concepts that you're trying to explain to them. So empathy is, you've got to feel their pain. What is their resistance to change? Why is that there? Perhaps somebody's built an empire. Maybe there's politics and there's control at higher echelons, in which case you've got to try and figure out how to navigate that. Inertia, why do we need to change? A lot of people think, why do I need to change? So they won't like it when you're coming to them with a new way of doing things. They'll want to just retrofit it into their way of doing things now. So it's kind of helping them come out of that. But you need to feel their pain, because then they will know that you're interested in their welfare rather than just trying to push something onto them. And then you've got natural skepticism. So, their own hearsay, I've heard agile is undisciplined, it doesn't work, and it always fails, and even maybe they've had a negative experience. So you've got to feel their pain. And you can deal with these last 2 points initially, for sure. That's your sphere of influence. The first 2 can be a little more tricky and may require more involvement at an organizational level to get people supporting you in your organization to overcome those problems. Then the next one is collaboration here. So when you're collaborating, again, and we'll visualize it a little more as we go through this, but you're taking your customers, your product owners, your teams, your project managers, your sponsors, you're taking them on a journey. You've got to educate them along the way. The best way to get them to learn is through hands-on activities, as they call it, kinesthetic learning. So doing things together. We did some interesting stuff on one Agile project where we had sessions where we used Lego to illustrate the principles of Agile and how it works. So because Lego, you'll build something with, and you'll say, right, here's a pile of Lego. It's a finite resource of Lego. We've got X number, 10 minutes or whatever to build something from it as a group together. And we used that to build something in a tight space of time with a description of what needs to be built. And we use that as a doing activity in a Scrum context. So with story points and estimating and all that sort of stuff, and prioritizing what should be built. And we use Lego as the medium to do that, because it's hands-on, it gets everybody learning, and the connection it makes to people's minds, because it's tangible. Software is more intangible. This was very tangible, so they could relate to it. And don't be theoretical about stuff, just be very practical. Use stories to educate, use anecdotes. help people visualize it, because again, we can, as technical people particularly, we can talk in concepts and abstract ideas which people don't really know what we mean. So we've got to connect with their, as we say, map of the world. Create interactivity, not just one-way presentations. You know, so when you're dealing with transition, when you're saying this is how we do it now in waterfall, and this is how we would do it in agile, and these are the changes and how it would be, show them then how you're going from A to B with that as well. That's also very important. So today we produce a business requirements document, we then get it signed off, we then do this. In agile, this is how that would work. So you kind of help them understand what they're thinking now and how things have always worked and how it should be in the new world when we've changed, and why and what the benefits are. So you've got to educate, you've got to, it's always a selling thing that you're doing with your organization. The last point then is managing cultural differences, and this is applicable if you're particularly working in global teams, distributed. This is the new normal, as they say. We're all remote working. You may be working international clients. Some people say that agile doesn't work if it's remote. I don't think we have a choice. I think things are going to stay the same way for a long time, and agile can work. It's just, we just have to be a bit more able to communicate, or a bit more willing to try different ways and innovative and creative ways to communicate with our audience. So we have cultural relatability, very important. You know, understanding how people think and work in different ways. So for example, if you're working with people in the UK, they're just very quick, make a decision, non-emotional, let's just get a decision, we've got to get there fast. In India, for example, working with Indian teams, you need to have more consensus. The groups need to think about it themselves and take the time and have the kind of feeling around it and then come to a conclusion. So we've got to understand how people work differently and work with those styles. With that sort of empathy and cultural intelligence, then we're able to understand how that we should tailor our communication and explain to other people how things might work differently because of the cultural differences, and people will start to understand that. Ways of working, you know, time zone awareness, preferred communication styles, all that stuff we have to understand and know. So, you know, kind of what you're doing is you're profiling your teams and profiling your audience using different these ideas of culture, empathy, communication, collaboration. We're understanding how should I message and how should I convince them that this is how we should do things, because your communication is about how do I convince them to come on the journey and to buy into what I'm doing. And then cultural influences on behavior. So, you know, for example, people may not want to make a decision until they've consulted their superior, and so therefore they're just waiting on a decision. So adjusting and understanding how we work through those dynamics. So those are the cultural differences. So obviously we've gone through a lot here. There's a lot here. We haven't touched on the Scrum concept as of yet. We will very shortly. But what it signifies here is the need for communicating, the need for guiding your audience and helping your company, your organization, your client change to a different way of working. So there's a lot involved. And we haven't talked about Scrum. We haven't talked about the actual delivery. How do we deliver this? So we need a methodology. And Scrum Master training is good. I can see we get the certification from it. We understand the mechanics of the Agile methodology. We establish what a Scrum Master's role is. But what it won't do for us as a certification by itself is how do you sell it? What are the emotional considerations? How do you package it up? How do you transition and implement it? How do you make it successful? Because that is for us to work out. So, you know, that's where a methodology comes into it, to take a structured process. How do we go through this? So I'll have a look at a couple of questions that have come through, and let's just take a quick pause. Somebody is saying that we've got some background noise. Is there a way to stop that? Is anybody hearing background noise? Or are we just having a couple of people with communication problems? Can you just let me know if you can hear well, or just say I can hear, or something in the chat, in case, just so I know that everything's okay with the communication. Okay. All right. So maybe there was some sound in there, some interference before. So got a couple of questions. Let's just talk about, so in a nutshell, what's the best way to describe an agile project? Okay. What's the best way to describe an agile project in a nutshell? It is, let's go through the agile process, and then perhaps we'll come back to that question, because I think we need to go through that bit. But what we're effectively saying is it's a way to create more close interaction with customers and our teams, so that we don't make mistakes, and we keep communication and feedback constant, so that we're always on track to deliver the goal of whatever we set out to do as software delivery. And the agility principles allow people to be responsive, allow us to create that feedback, isn't locking us into a long plan. So I would say that. What else is the question up here? Somebody is saying talking is good, but showing a presentation would be easier for us. There is a presentation that we are going through on this. So if anybody else is experiencing not being able to see a presentation, then let me know. If you're on your phone, you may need to swiping between the image or my video and the presentation. How to manage welcome scope changes in Agile. So that is the heart of Agile, actually. That is the whole principle. As we said earlier, we welcome changes and requirements, and scope changes. We have to assume that and we'll talk about this shortly, but we have what we call as a product owner, and that is the ambassador of the customer. The customer knows what they want. The product owner represents the customer and says, yes, this is the vision for this product that we need to deliver, this piece of software. And assuming that they have a good vision and they're clear about that, which is important, and that's where you come into it, because you help them crystallize and define that vision very clearly, then there should be always welcome changes, because they're tweaking their product as we go through the process of delivery. If there's a fundamental change in scope and it's completely wrong, then I think there's an issue there with the communication between what the product owner wants. So as Scrum Master, as a leader, you've got to help bring out the detail of what the product owner wants, and therefore there's a constant communication between product owner and Scrum Master to make that work. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So we need a methodology. So this is a methodology that I just talked about earlier. So this is a 5-step process. So the first step in this methodology is about you. It's about establishing your role as a servant leader, as a Scrum Master, and establishing your credibility. Understanding you're the driver. You're the driver because you're facilitating and you're guiding everybody else. So you're kind of driving the train. Your next point is then you've got the research to do. So this is about the Agile concept, and this is the vehicle by which to carry your customers and teams in. So you're going to drive this vehicle, and that is like, how do you build this vehicle, this Agile vehicle that's going to carry your customers and your teams to make it comfortable for them, and to carry them as they're on the journey, and to convince them to come aboard. So you've got this is an important stage, understanding the Agile concepts and understanding your audience. As we said before, the empathy part of the things is, what is the concerns, what are the problems, how do we overcome those, so we can keep them on board and we can get them comfortable with the journey. The next step is then we've got to arrange. So we've got to figure out how to transition the organization from where they are now and to where we want them to be, and that's laying down the tracks. And that is what we call as a transition. So that is, what are the processes that we have now in place? How do we move on from those and adopt Agile ones and get them in place? What is needed there? How do we adjust it? To what extent can we implement it? You may not be able to do everything. So you've got to figure out how to transition your organization, and also how to build the right team, get the right power team in place, so that you've got a good developers, you've got good testers, they're all on board with it, your product owner, all the team building that needs to happen. The next step then is to involve them. So now you've established yourself as the driver, you've got the vehicle through the research, and you know what vehicle to carry them through, you've laid the tracks down, then you need to get them on board. Your team and your passengers, by preparing them, teach them how to do this. So this is the convincing them to come on board and say, right, what did we need to do? How does this work? What is everybody's role? What do they need to play? Embedding those convictions in Agile as I said before, things like interactive sessions, visual presentations, interactivity between them, between yourself and the team, so they all know their role, giving them practical examples so their role becomes, they realize their role through some doing activities. We talked about Lego before. It's quite a fun part as well. If you can do the Lego bit, I know it's a little difficult when we're remote. Perhaps there's some better ways that we can do things like that. But if you like, it's a team building exercise that involves embedding the principles of Agile. So that is important. And then the final part is the navigation. So where you execute your project. So this is effectively where you're driving them to the destination, execute the project, and complete the journey. And what this means is taking the team from the vision of the project. So what is the vision of the project? The starting point is to the customer, what is your vision? What do you want out of this software, and how is it? And right through to detail, going into the next stage of breaking that down into epics and then into sprints, and then delivering working solutions into your organization in record time. And this is effectively a way of going from A to B, to get all your team, to get them all on board, to get them understanding, so that you've done your thinking, you understand how to transition them organizational, to help them carry them and what is needed to carry them through. And that's the methodology that I developed and use. It's very empowering because people need certainty and they need a strong methodology in place to help the customers. They'll have total trust in you. So by going through this 5-step process, particularly the 4 steps is the preparatory side, where you're preparing, then what will happen is you'll be prepared, your customers will be prepared, your team will be prepared, and everybody will be knowing. You'll also be able to deal with people who are, as I said before, on the edges of things that might create problems for you as well, because you'll need to involve them in this process. So what do we learn from this experience? So we've got some very good learning points. We've got soft stuff. We learn problem solving. We learn how to influence, how to be confident, good communication, empathy. We can understand the agile process and software lifecycle, tools and Jira, and things like wiki. So for example, rather than having, a lot of organizations have this static SharePoint, is more using what you call as a wiki, which is a more interactive, dynamic presentation of your project that everybody in the organization can look at. It's like the window into your project. You can put your reports, you can show how you're progressing in your delivery, you can show them what is the scope of a particular sprint, so it becomes something that they can interact with, and that's where organizations need to be. And a lot of organizations are not doing that. It's still in this sort of the static SharePoint old style stuff. And then the fun bit is you get to do Lego, you can do team building, and you get a lot of interaction and fun. Because it's more people focused, then you get that natural interaction, and it's not stagnant. So let's talk about Scrum. Where do we start with Scrum? Because it's a big piece. We start very simply like this. For those who have done Scrum and are Scrum Masters, you'll know this already. But very, very simply, you start from a vision, a goal. That is the broad vision that the customer or the product owner has for where they want their software to go. And what you then do is, as a Scrum Master, what you're helping facilitate, break that down into a sprint, which is we'll come into on the next slide, which is basically a mini project where you build some software. And within that sprint, each of those sprints, you'll have user stories or tasks, some activity that needs to be done to get that sprint to completion. And then it's, you've got number of sprints that will then allow you to take your product to its vision and to achieve the vision and to goal that you set out to do. So that's very, very simply what it is. You're breaking down your project. A bit more detailed, a small increment is what a sprint is. An increment means a piece of working software. So this is the building block for your product. The sprint is a mini project, and it has all the phases in it. It has the design, the build, the test, everything like that. And that delivers the part of the overall software product and which adds value to the customer. So the team, most importantly, actually, the team is made up of analysts, developers, and testers, and you have a product owner that's there as well. The product owner is basically your customer, and different to different to the traditional ways of doing things where the business says, here's my requirements, see you in 6 months. This is actually where, excuse me, this is where your customer or your product owner is involved with you day to day and knows what it is that's being delivered. It's a 2 or 3 week sprint, so it's a short duration. You think, oh, how much software could you build in 2 or 3 weeks? Well, there's other factors there, but your target is that 2 or 3 weeks you build some software. And at the end of the sprint, you would demo that solution to your customer. You will and you'll get feedback from them. So you're basically going to sit in front of the customer and say, right, Peter, we've finished this sprint in 3 weeks. We're going to show you the software now. We're going to demonstrate you the software, and we want you to approve that this is what you wanted. So the product owner is involved, and he knows or she knows what is in that sprint, all the content, all the software. So let's take a practical example here. Let's say you imagine you were told to build a piece of working software, like for example, let's call it an online bookstore, in 3 weeks, and they want you to build this software in increments of 3 weeks. What would you build in 3 weeks if you said, okay, it's an online store, for example? And feel free to add some ideas into the chat box on this as well. So if you're building a piece of software in 3 weeks for an online bookstore, and the online bookstore doesn't exist, it's from scratch, what do you think, what would be useful functionality as a customer, do you think, that would be something that you could deliver at the end as usable? It's got to be usable, so it's not just producing some database tables and some middleware or something like that. It's got to be something that's fully working that the customer can interact with. Examples: login, creating user account, searching for a book, and I'm keeping this very basic on purpose just to illustrate principles. Searching for a book, adding a book to a basket, for example, paying with a credit card, and the payment can just be put all your credit card details in and submit. There's no adding of payment methods or saving payment methods. So you could see that as a potential what you call as increment of working software that could allow the customer to have experience. You might say, actually, we won't put payment in there. We'll just put a search, we'll put add to a basket, we'll be able to place an order. And you might say that the order, as part of the order, the telephone number of the customer will be there. So we'll telephone the customer and take payment over the phone. That's also a valid option. So it's very much dependent on what the product owner wants to do and where the business is going. So there's different ways of doing things. And that's an example of potentially of a working solution. So that is, we'll carry this example of a bookstore through because I just want to make it just very simple. So somebody's written a catalog of all books. Yeah, good example, right? So you could say, actually, we're going to have a catalog of all the books that we're going to sell, and because we're going to put search on there, or maybe you wouldn't put search. You might just very simply say, we'll just put a catalog of all the books that the customer can browse, and they can tick a box and say, I want to order this one, tick another box and say, I want to order that one. It puts an order through, they put their email address or phone number, it comes through to a customer service representative who calls them up and says, okay, I've seen you put an order through for 2 books, let's take payment from you. So it can be like that. So yeah, thanks, Namita. That was a good example, just having a catalog of all books. So that is how that works. So at the beginning, there's nothing existing for that particular functionality. We have a process we call a Kanban view, and I'll show you that on a visual in a bit about how a Scrum board looks. But you have a concept of to do, in progress, and done. So that means that you have work that's pending. The in progress means it's being developed and perhaps tested, and at the end you move it to done. So you're it's like post-its on a board. So you've got a good visual of where stuff is at in the process, and you can track all of that. So yeah, so then that is the sprint. So this is the unit. This is the single unit, and obviously by itself it's not enough. You've got to have more than one sprint, and this is the fun bit. When do we end? We've just delivered part of an online bookstore. So if we take Namita's example, we've done a catalog of books. We've allowed the customer to tick which ones they want, put their details in, and then it goes to an email, and then somebody picks it up in the organization. Very easy sprint, easy to build that functionality. You know, let's say we've got 2 developers and 1 tester working on it, so it can be done. So we've just delivered that. We're closer to the goal because the vision is an online bookstore. You need to obviously expand on that vision with your product owner or customer to say, okay, well, give me more about this online bookstore. You know, how technical is it? How technology savvy is it? You know, is it integrated with Facebook? Is it got bots that are automating some of the interactions? Is it just a website with a portal, and that's how people come into it? You know, what is your vision for that, and how good should it be? You know, what's your competition? So you've got to drive out that vision with the product owner to help them think about what they want, so that you can take that through to the implementation. Then the next question you're going to be asking is, okay, I've done 1 sprint. How many sprints will it take to get to the goal? And this is where it's different. So waterfall would have specified all of this up front. We sat down with the product owner and said, okay, we're going to put 4 requirements documents. Going to take 1 month. It's going to take 2 months to do a design. It's going to take 3 months to do a build. It's going to take 1 month to test all of that. So, you know, there's a 6-month process there. We commit that to the sponsor. We start tracking that date. 3 months down the road, we hit some snags. We've missed something. We've underestimated. We realize it's going to take 2 months longer. And plus, the vision of the customers changed. They didn't realize that actually they've asked for all this stuff up front, just like the idea of when somebody went out shopping to buy 3 months worth of things. They didn't need all of that. They took too much on. So actually, the customers realized that we don't need all of that actually. So we made a mistake. So we built more what was required. There's a waste. So when does the product end? When does this project end? So this is the difference with Agile, and particularly with Scrum. The project ends when the customer says it ends, and this is what organizations struggle with, because they struggle. They want predictability. The key difference between waterfall and Agile is, and why you need to make Agile happen if you can, is at the end of every sprint, the customer gets to see the software increment. So in other words, when we did that demo of the bookstore to the customer product owner, they're like, yeah, that's really good. And they thought, actually, I was thinking that we need to have adding of payment methods, and we need to have loads of payment methods and credit cards. But for my need, which is very simple, and I'm keeping this simple deliberately, but for my need, I think it's sufficient to just be able to tick which ones they want. Maybe we'll add a search feature, but putting online payments and all that stuff is so complicated. We're not ready for it. The organization is not ready for it yet. Let's just keep it as tick the ones they want, send an email through with their contact details, and we'll follow up with customer service and take payment over the phone. Much quicker, much easier, faster time to market. Let's get it out there, and that's my minimum product. So it's down to the product owner, because they know the business, they know the business need, and they can adjust to the business need as we're going through the project, for them to decide when they want to stop that project. And this is what business and technical project managers struggle with, because they always want that estimation up from the beginning. How long is this going to take? How much time? How much resource? We need to plan everything. So there's a difference, and it's difficult. And this is part of the transition. And I've got some ideas on this. We'll talk. So this is how it works, and that therefore this constant feedback on the end of every 2 or 3 weeks sprint from the product owner allows you to redirect, incorporate change, feedback, and reprioritize their needs so that they get to the goal faster. If they don't know the vision, though, then it's going to be difficult, and that's why the visioning bit is very important to understand what they want. And with waterfall, a lot of the time the customer, they don't really know what they want until they've actually tangibly used it and seen it. So therefore, showing them increments and demonstrations every 2-3 weeks allows them to visualize and allows them to know more what they want. They connect more with it. So that is that. And therefore, with this, the way that this works, it's a lower upfront investment, because you're not planning everything and potentially wasting a lot of activity. You're more, as they say, lean, and agile is based on lean principles, because you're constantly feeding back, because you're doing things in small chunks. Back to the shopping analogy, you're buying every week instead of 3 months at a time. You're wasting less, and it gives you time for reflection of what you actually need, and therefore it's a lower upfront investment, and it reduces the risk. So this makes a lot of sense, and you're probably wanting to sell this idea to your organization or your customer, but you've got to be aware that your customer is in a mindset of the old ways of doing things, so you've got to work with them to help convince them that this can be more effective, save more time, save more money and resource, and waste a lot less. So this is what it comes down to, the biggest fear. When will it be done? This is the problem. And as we said, there isn't an end date, but you're going to be asked by a customer, when will it be done? And that's what they want to know. They want the certainty, they want the surety. And I had the same problem as well. And what we did to handle this is we actually said, just wait for a few, let us deliver a few sprints, because this is a different way of doing things. And let us get the customer feedback rather than the project manager and the project timelines dominating this whole delivery process. Let the customer's feedback dominate the whole delivery process, and therefore it's a transfer of power from the project managers to the customer, and that's where the threat and the politics can come up, because they feel like they're losing control. So very sensitive, a lot of diplomacy required, but this is where you get the customer closely aligned with the project managers and get the customer's voice as the most powerful voice and the influential voice and the sponsor, because they have the overriding need. And if they're satisfied, then everyone else should be satisfied. So do the first few sprints as a prototype, get them in the flow of Agile, and then demonstrate continued delivery, and explain to the sponsor this is how it works, and keep educating the sponsor that it's up to them or the product manager or the product owner to decide when they're ready and what is minimum viable product, as we call it. And that's customer collaboration. So if we can do that, we can crack that whole issue of having a predicting, when is everything going to be ready by. So so how do we string this all together? And this is where the Scrum process comes into it. And what we have is in fact, let me just go back a minute here. I'll come back to this slide shortly. This is how it gets strung together. So we have an evolving product, we have iterative sprints delivering software, and we're building up on that software. So what happens is the product owner is responsible for prioritizing. And if you imagine these numbers here, 1 to 12, are features. So for example, number 1 is catalog of books, to Namita's point. Number 2 here is being able to select books to add to my basket. Number 3 is being able to place an order. If you imagine those are those sorts of, at a very simple level, functionality, then the product owner's job is to prioritize these from top to bottom order. And 1 to 12 is a long list. And what you do is you prioritize that, and they're constantly moving those priorities around, saying what they want to do next. And they're saying, right, we'll take these 3 now, and we'll put them into the first sprint, and we'll build something. And then after that sprint, so we plan that sprint out, we execute that sprint, we retrospect or we feedback on that sprint through a demonstration to the product owner, and then the product owner comes back and reprioritizes and thinks, okay, for the next sprint, I now know I'm more clear about what we want to do, because that bookstore, I'm thinking that yes, we've got the catalog, we've got the adding of items, but I actually think we should have an automated payment process in there, put the credit cards in. So they come up with the next sprint with these functionalities around payment, and they bring that into the next sprint. So now we have searching of books, adding it to a basket. In the second sprint, we have payment methods. It's like, okay, this is now looking better. It's more close to what I want. But I'm also thinking in the next sprint, we need to manage some of the processes around automatically expiring cards, or making sure we're validating the payment methods properly, making sure that we can save my card to my favorite cards and reuse it next time. And also we'll add in a wish list there for them, so that they can, perhaps they like books, or maybe the book isn't available yet, so then they can add it to their wish list. So let's add that in there, and then we'll put that in as a third sprint. So as they're going through each sprint, because they're tangibly working with a solution and seeing it, they start to get more ideas about how the product should evolve and where it should get to what point, and that's the evolution process. And that's extremely empowering for the customer, because they own the continual prioritization of what should come next, and that is really powerful. That is what is needed actually to put the power in the customer's hands. So quick check on questions as we're going through this. Let's see a few more coming in. something about project management here. Let's just see what we have here. PM focuses on estimating because this is still what is to be expected reported up in the ladder. What do we do? Yeah, agree on that. And that is difficult. And that is the challenge that many people pose. And it's got to be reported up the ladder. And what you can do as a sort of as an exercise, but communicate this, is say, actually, after 3 sprints, we have got a sense where we're headed with this product, and we understand what the work, how quickly the development team can build stuff, because in 3 sprints we can see the speed of how they can deliver. We kind of have an understanding of where we're headed for this project, and we've probably got a budget on it anyway. So you can say, well, we think it's going to be 6 months, but we can't commit to that completely. And this is the difficult bit, and this is where people may start to laugh at you, because you're like, well, hold on, you just told me it's going to take 6 months to deliver, but you can't completely commit to that date. Yes, it's a broad estimate because we're using Agile. And then they'll say, well, we want a concrete estimate. And what you can actually do is you can actually use statistics of your organization where perhaps waterfall projects have had committed delivery dates in the past, and the number of times that those dates have actually changed and what issues have come up as a result, and say, we are trying this new, so this is important to get your customer, before embarking on this actual implementation, is get everybody on board up to the higher level of the organization, for this very reason, to say, you may ask for an estimate, we will give you an idea from a project management, because we have to report that up the ladder, but we can't be 100% on those estimates because we're using an Agile process. And if you get that agreement in up front and get that all agreed at a steering committee level, at a group level, then you should have less of a problem when you do report that up, with the caveat to say that this is not exactly, this is not science. This is subject to being delayed because you've asked for it to be. They may just turn around and say, actually, don't worry, we've seen the first 3 sprints with the product owners well engaged, the sponsor knows what's going in, they're confident for you just to crack on. So every organization is going to be different. More bureaucratical organizations will have more robust processes in place. So this is part of the transition where you need to have your circles of influence as wide as possible. Okay, so that is basically how that strings together. And you can understand how we take a sprint delivers a small piece of software. We have multiple sprints strung together. The functionality that goes into each of those sprints is determined by the product owner, who has the vision for the system and is constantly prioritizing what they want in the next one. So you're also sprint planning ahead of time. Okay, so tools, just a quick one on tools and demos. So generally Jira is used, and we can have a very brief peek into Jira, and I've just got a small demo for you here just to bring the bookstore example. And it's very simple. So I just want to get the principle of how the Kanban process will work to help us visualize how work is being done. But Jira is typically used for sprint planning, for what we call as daily stand-ups, where you're looking at your functionality and saying, okay, what are we doing today? What have we done yesterday? What issues do we have? And keeping everybody involved and unblocking issues as a Scrum Master. You can report, and out of it you can plan your releases, and you can track your development of your product. So very quickly, let's have a quick look at what this looks like here. So you can see here that you have a online bookstore. You have, this is something I put together in Jira. So if we go to projects, I'll create an online bookstore here. We have what we call as a Kanban board, and we have a backlog. There are 2 things. So we talked before about the product owner is responsible for figuring out all of the different functionalities or user stories that they want, and they put them on what you call as a backlog, which is basically a long list of all the items that they want functionality. So coming back to this, searching of a book title, adding a credit card, searching an author, setting a default payment method. So these are all specific functionalities with user stories, and user story writing isn't in this session because that's a whole topic in itself. But how do you write these in a way that can be implemented by a developer and tested by a tester? That's what the user story will do. But this is a list of items, and what the product owner will do. If I'm a product owner, I'm going to look at this and say, right, what is the priority of what I wanted to deliver? Because the way that generally works is you will tick the top items are most important, and highest priority. The bottom items are lower priority, or perhaps they're more coarse, too broad areas of functionality that needs to be broken down into smaller chunks or user stories. So they're maybe less thought about, but it's a big long list of things. So let's say I want to reprioritize. So I'm going to do some elements of searching and going to put in add a credit card. So I'm going to put 3 things in there. I'm going to say, right, I would like to make a sprint out of these 3 things here. So I'm going to say, I'm going to put them all into my selected for development basket. And that is what we call a sprint planning. So I'm going to take those items and I'm going to then run them through my Kanban board here. That is the sprint. So I've just, in a really quick way, totally rudimentary way, just defined what a sprint is, what is the content of that sprint. And I'm tracking that as my sprint that's going to take me 2 or 3 weeks. So then what we're then doing is with the Agile team, we're saying, right, searching book title. Okay, so Jason's got this one. He's doing the build on this at the moment. And Preeti's got searching of author. So we've got 2 items in build right now. We've got AJ who's going to be doing the testing. And as Jason's finished search book title, we'll move it over to test and it's going to be tested. So what we can do there is, and obviously this is going to be more complex because there's going to be more items in it, but you can track through your cards in a visual way. So everybody can get on a call, again with a remote thing, get on a call and look at these and update them on the fly, add some comments into it, or raise issues against it. And then you can then say, right, once we've done all of these and all of them are tested, and we say, right, AJ's done all the testing on these, Jason and Preeti have finished all the build, AJ's going to test them. Then when we do the demo, and you can structure this board however you like. You might want to have a demo swim line that says these are ready for demo, and then you can then say, right, okay, that's tracked. We're ready to do the demo at the end of 3 weeks. We're going to demonstrate all of this to the product owner, and then the product owner is going to sign them off and say, yep, search book title done, happy with that, with really good functionality. Search author was done, yeah, that works. Add credit card. There was some problem with add credit card. They didn't do it right. There was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication. It's not fit for purpose. It's not ready. So we're going to put that back into the sprint, or you might just put that back into the backlog and say we'll replan that later and put it to the top of the list. So that's broadly how you would track through the visual way of tracking your progress and communicating nicely. And this is a very good way of collaborating with a team. It works really well. So it's a very simple demo of Jira. I don't know if you're using Jira, but it's a very useful tool. You can set it up in any way you want. You can set up different components for different things. You can create your epics and your user stories and track them through very well. It's definitely improved in its functionality over the years. It used to be much less easy to use, and you can even use it on a mobile, and it's easier to swipe stuff across it from one swim lane to the other. Okay, so why do all of this? What is the use of this? As we talked about in the beginning, it's very good for personal growth. There's a lot of demand for it to be good at what you're doing. If you can be a product owner or be an agile project manager or an agile scrum master, it's good money. Lots of opportunity remote and overseas. It's really creative and innovative and inspiring because you're constantly delivering. It's, in one sense, it certainly can be perceived as more high pressure because you have to be very focused throughout the whole process. And some people say to me sometimes, well, if you're doing all these sprints and you're doing all this development and you're really managing everything very tightly and being very productive, how do people like, what happens if you get burnout, because if it's especially a long project? And one of the things is you can do with Agile is if you should be ahead of time in certain respects. So in a particular sprint, if you need to do some downtime with the team and do something differently, maybe you want to tidy up some documentation or maybe do some research on some with the product owner or do some brainstorming with the product owner, you can do that, because if you're delivering in this way and you're very, very on the button and fast, then people will see that you're delivering quickly. So don't overcommit and say, right, it's like a marathon, because obviously a marathon could be considered as multiple sprints, but if you take it like that and your marathon is your whole project, you may burn people out. So you have to pace everything. you've got to check in with the team and understand if they're, if they're coping, if it's too much. Obviously, people have to have holiday time, etc. But otherwise, it's creative. It gets everybody nicely well involved. Good salary. You get sought after, and you can move around as well because of the demand for it. And personally, from my perspective at least, it's highly intuitable and practicable because it's based on people interacting together more. If you're the kind of person who likes to sort of just go through the waterfall process and just wait for your turn to be activated as a tester or as a developer and then sort of switch off when it goes down the chain, it's not so much for you because it's kind of, if you can be like, you can hide more in waterfall than you can with agile. Because of the inefficiencies that are built into the way that waterfall is delivered. At least that's what I've seen. And fundamentally, organizations need this as well. So recapping, so this is the framework, this is the methodology, and this system works for everyone who applies it very seriously in detail. So T for think, so self-learning, your mindset, establishing your credibility, establish yourself as a driver. Then you do the research and understand agile in your organization's way, or where your organization is at now, knowing your audience, how to sweet talk them and convince them to do this. That's your vehicle to get them agreeing to what you're doing. You then arrange and work out how you're going to help your organization move from what they're doing now and their ways of working now to the agile way, and build your power team. So you lay down the tracks, get all your teams trained, involve, train them all, and stakeholders, use hands-on practical tools, and get your team on board and ready for the journey. And then finally, then you navigate. So then you implement your project and you take them through that. So get some really good results. Really satisfying to build good quality software that everyone's happy with. It's nothing worse than doing a demo. I don't know if about you, but when you do a demo to a user and you're just like, you're not really feeling like they're very involved. It's very kind of, they don't feel almost like they own it because they haven't defined it with you. And I think a lot of the time that's experienced in a waterfall setting where you've done everything and you're kind of doing everything on behalf of the business, and the business is kind of in the back seat that's saying, yeah, no, that seems to be fine. They're not really excited because they haven't really contributed as much as they can. Okay, so just a very, very brief thing here. So this is, important. What will people think of you if you can do this well? So this is just, it's a bit blowing my own trumpet, but I wanted to just show you this as a testimonial that I've had. That is that if you do this and if you communicate and get people on board, then you're seen as somebody who can take the idea right from the beginning to completion. And embedding it into the organization as well, and be personable, approachable. Use humor, build relationships and rapport with people. You'll get them on board, and you become a good SME. You also you get better communication skills by doing this process. You actually learn how to communicate better. This is my personal experiences, and also you get confidence. If you have a good methodology, if you understand how to do this methodology, and you get those skills, and you build those skills and develop those skills, then you really feel confident in achieving this, and it feels very good to transition and move somebody from where they are now to a better place. And that is how that works. So if you do it well, if you have a good methodology, then you can really make a difference to people, and people will remember that for a long time, and it can become a model for your organization as well. So that's just some live experience that I had. And Q&A. So just a couple of minutes left for a Q&A session. Problems, you're having, solutions you're having, you need around communication, project methodologies, cultural intelligence. We talked about that. Dealing with other cultures, and just general confidence, negotiation, and presentation. So if you have, we'll spend a few minutes just fielding some questions. If you want to also interact with me then and ask questions outside of this, then you're more than welcome, and you can connect with me. If you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, you can just send me a message, connect with me, and drop me a message. If you want to have a chat also, then happy to do that as well, and we can talk through some of your things that you're trying to do together. There's a few questions just being written here now. How are risks and issues raised? Yep, so risks and issues should be, it's good to have a risks and issues log running alongside this as well, and making sure that those risks and issues are addressed as part of the what you call as the daily stand-up. So SJ's asked that question. You have risks and issues generally on a project, so you need to have that mechanism still. So with this delivery, it's not that project management disciplines go away, it's just that they have to be looked at in conjunction with this way of delivering. Risks and issues, generally what I find on projects is risks go in a risk register and they're reviewed every periodic quarter or whatever it is, whatever the process of the organization. Nobody really seems to ever deal with them a lot of the time, at least from my experience, and that's probably the more bigger organizations. But risks and issues should be raised as part of the daily stand-up if we've got some risks with this implementation, with this sprint. So if we can keep risks and issues to a particular sprint, they will get dealt with. The Scrum Master's job is to help try and solve those. If they're wider than that sprint, then they should be taken up with the product owner and the sponsor around those risks and issues so that they're made clear. So you keep the communication open and make sure that we're always raising those problems and looking to address them as well. I wouldn't, for example, a lot of people like to put risks and issues in Jira. It depends on your preference. You might find, and I've experienced this a lot, when you talk to a manager, especially on the business side, and you say, right, we've got everything recorded in Jira, they're like, I don't understand Jira, I don't like it, it's a technical tool, I'm not interested. So be sensitive to how you're going to record those and communicate those in your organization as well. Can members of an Agile team have multiple roles? What you have is, you could have that. So you have developers, you have testers, you have the product owner, but the roles have to be very, very clearly defined, because what you need to have is predictability and consistency in the delivery. One of the things with Agile is you are measuring the performance of your teams. You're measuring the performance of your teams based on their constant and historic delivery. So we call it as something called velocity, which is how much functionality can your Agile team deliver within a sprint. And you benchmark that and you measure it each time to see whether, when you're putting user stories into the next one, that you're not putting too much functionality in and you're not putting too less in. So you're keeping the performance consistent. If you start moving people around with roles and stuff, if they're not trained in that particular role as well as the other, then what you'll start to get is mixed performance, and then you won't be able to measure your team. A lot of this is about measuring the team's performance. So you may have business analysts who also can be as testers as well. But if you start mixing up and saying, right, for this sprint, we're going to have 2 testers and the business analyst, and the next sprint, the business analyst is going to become the tester, so we'll have 3 testers. Again, you won't be measuring the performance of your team in a consistent way, so then it becomes difficult to know. But again, you've got to go with according to how it's working for you in your organization. Take the principles of Agile and adopt them according to what the need is, so you're not being dogmatic. That's very important. Just conscious of the time here. We've got a couple of minutes left. When's a question from Ravi? When story grooming will happen? Story grooming is a continual process. So just for those who don't know about story grooming, basically what that is, if we just go back a few slides here, in fact, I'll go on to this one. So what I showed you in Jira was the product backlog. It's all of the user stories that the product owner says, this is the functionality I know at this point in time what I want. They can add to that, they can reprioritize it. What they're doing is ongoing grooming. So what the product owner is continually doing is looking at this product backlog and seeing whether stuff needs to be reprioritized, whether there's number 12 is not finely defined enough, it's too broad to turn into a piece of functionality to deliver. Because when a piece of functionality goes into a sprint, it has to be a user story, it's got to be a task, it's got to be specific, because you're going into a sprint where it means that the developers are building it, the testers are testing it, so it's got to be ready, it's got to be there. We can't have it unformed, because then you'll have all questions and clarifications going on during your precious time of 2 or 3 week sprint. So it's got to be addressed before. So the product owner will be continually doing that, moving things around, expanding on things, breaking things down into more detail. That is an ongoing activity. So there are some more questions. We are unfortunately out of time, so I'm sorry I couldn't answer everybody's questions, but I hope that's been really beneficial. Again, just final point here, do connect with me, ask me questions if you want to connect and follow up, then we can discuss together. Thank you very, very much for your time, for your precious time today. It's been really good to have you all on this, and I've loved the questions. I hope you found this very useful, and have a really good rest of your Saturday and weekend. Thank you very much.